President Lee Jae-hyon hosts his Indonesian counterpart Prabowo Subianto at the Blue House on this Wednesday for a summit that seeks to bolster trade and security. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Wednesday, April 1st here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. South Korea and Indonesia have agreed to elevate their ties to those of a special, comprehensive strategic partnership. For more on this, I have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I also have Lee Jae-hyon at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Lee, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. We shall start here in the studio. Steven, let's begin with details of the summit between President Lee Jae-hyon and Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto here in Seoul earlier this morning.
I think the most newsworthy thing, the one that the media outlets are focusing in on, is just because so much of everything happening nowadays is about energy. The two sides came away with some shared understanding on expanding cooperation on that front, specifically through Indonesia potentially supplying coal and liquid natural gas to Korea. As we all know, South Korea is reliant on imports for almost all of its energy needs, and it's quite reliant specifically on imports of petroleum products through the Middle East, which are disrupted nowadays due to the ongoing conflict between the US and Israel and Iran. So that was something that, as a journalist, I was definitely watching. Beyond that, I think Indonesia is one of these kind of older partners that South Korea has, where South Korea is kind of further along the development path than Indonesia and can lend some of its technical and its manufacturing expertise. So Lee and Prabowo talked about, they signed a whole bunch of memorandums of understanding, and some of those were on expanding cooperation in renewable energy and data centers. And I just do think that there's quite a bit of areas where the two sides have kind of comparative advantage, as Indonesia still has a lot of inexpensive labor, and South Korea has a lot more technical and manufacturing expertise. So I think the two leaders are looking to kind of further deepen cooperation in those areas.
Right, and before we delve deeper into those hopes, Dr. Lee, could you tell us a bit or give us some background information about bilateral ties between these two countries of the past 5 decades?
Okay, let me just touch upon the 3 different areas, like diplomatic relations and economic relations, as well as defense industry cooperation. First of all, the 2 countries' diplomatic relation was kind of had a very slow start, because Indonesia was right after the independence. Indonesia was in non-aligned movement and was very close to North Korea. So the diplomatic tie came quite late in 1973. But since then, in the past 50 years, the diplomatic relation between the 2 countries steadily developed. And in 2017, the bilateral relations reached to a special strategic comprehensive partnership, which is one of the highest diplomatic relations we have with Southeast Asian countries. And also economically, the Korea and Indonesia have mutually complementary economic structure. For example, South Korea is very strong in the advanced manufacturing, but the Indonesia is also very strong in energy and mineral resource. So we can a lot to trade between the 2 countries. And so the trade volume grows steadily, and today it reaches at more than $21 billion US. And also, what is very interesting is also defense industry cooperation. And if you look at the past record, Indonesia was one of the early buyer of South Korea's defense industry product. In 2001, Indonesia bought some military aircraft, and In 2011, also Indonesia bought submarines from South Korea. This was really kind of a springboard for South Korea's defense industry to knock on the international market.
Right. Steven, with regard to their latest summit, what aspects of the two leaders' agenda appear to be making headlines as we speak?
Well, I know going into this meeting there was a fair bit of anticipation about the possible signing of a deal regarding KF-21 fighter jets. I haven't seen anything from the results so far. I don't know if things are completely sealed yet, but the two sides have not announced that I'm aware of publicly any deal regarding defense cooperation. But I know that this is a deal that's been in the works for some time. I think some of the analysis I've seen suggests that a formal signing might take place at some point later this year. But this particular deal, I'm sure Dr. Lee knows more about this than me, but it carries some international significance in that it would amount to the first time that South Korea has exported a fighter aircraft that was developed completely using domestic technology. So it would be a kind of milestone in that area, and it would open the door potentially for South Korea to make more of these types of exports and to expand its defense industry to another area where it has customarily not had a lot of traction. South Korea's defense exports, I think, are growing quite significantly, but they've been mostly taking advantage of South Korea's ability to produce things quickly and reliably and less expensively than other competitor exporters. But this deal, if it comes to fruition, would mark a kind of interesting point in that it would be a testament to domestically produced technology. So it'd be quite significant in that area. So we might see some signaling from the two leaders on this, but that's definitely something that the two sides will be working on going forward.
Right. Dr. Lee, there are quite a number of pundits who believe that this particular summit comes at a rather crucial time for these two countries. Do you share this outlook?
Yeah, of course, I share that outlook. This summit is quite important and crucial in mainly two reasons. First, for the bilateral relations, as just mentioned, one of the most important cooperation between Indonesia and Korea is defense industry cooperation. And as you know, we had a little bit of trouble regarding the joint development of KF-21 in the past few years. But the two leaders met last year and they agreed to resume cooperation on the defense industry. So it is about to restart. And also this summit is kind of the first bilateral meeting between President Subianto and President Lee Jae-hyon. Of course, they met twice before, but it was at the side of a multilateral summit. So this is the kind of genuine first bilateral meeting. And the other aspect is the kind of the strategic and economic environments that surrounds both Indonesia and South Korea. If you look at the strategic and economic environment that's surrounding these two countries today, there are superpower competitions and superpowers unilateralism and the wars going on, and the supply chain crisis, food crisis, and energy crisis, a whole range of issues there. So in this context, Indonesia and South Korea as a middle power in the region, we have a lot to cooperate, especially these two middle powers has to put their hands together for the peace and stability as well as economic prosperity for the whole region. So this summit is quite crucial for these two reasons.
Right, and speaking about the economy, Steven, I understand South Korea and Indonesia are rolling out a cross-border payment system this particular month. Could you tell us a bit more about this, and what do you believe are the broader implications of this system?
My understanding of this is it's a QR code-based thing that allows people to travel to the other country and to make payments in the country that they don't live in, to the country that they're arriving in, without having to carry that country's cash and without having to go through the trouble of either paying for my foreign bank accounts or from going to one of those money changer stalls. That all feels kind of outdated or anachronistic at this point. And so, I mean, I think the main motivation here is just convenience, and because it allows people to travel without, having to run this errand before they leave or having to deal with we've all landed at an airport in a foreign country and realized that, maybe this taxi driver is not going to want to take my credit card, and I don't have the cash of this country. What do I do? You don't necessarily want to go to one of these touts that's hanging out outside of an airport and offering to change your money for you. So I think it's just a kind of small step to improve convenience for travelers and just to kind of encourage cross-border interchange by making things easier for people. The idea that people might be traveling back and forth between the two countries to implement these deals. We would have more business travel and more diplomatic exchanges, and this is just I'd say it has practical value in just that it makes travel easier, and it also has a kind of symbolic value. It shows that the two countries there's a level of trust between them. There's a kind of apparatus in place that supports interchange.
Right, indeed. Dr. Lee, the presence of foreign workers in South Korea has been growing in recent years, and there have been calls for a widening of South Korea's doors, given the country's plunging population, of course. How should South Korea seek to set up a productive, if you will, workforce going forward, Dr. Lee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you mentioned, basically South Korea is a manufacturing-based economy, and to run this manufacturing economy, you need a lot of a workforce. But at the same time, South Korea is experiencing one of the lowest birth rate in the world. So there is a kind of a dilemma between the needs and the supply. And this mismatch puts is grave concern for South Korea's economy. So there has been a lot of discussion in the government in the past few years regarding the easing entry requirement for the foreign workers, such as a visa for skilled labor and seasonal workers and even students. And I guess the government, step by step, easing the sort of barrier for the foreign workers to come into South Korea. And the biggest question we have here in South Korea is that if South Korea general public's perception on foreign workers, would it change in any time soon? At the moment, some part of South Korean society have got sort of condescending view on the foreign workers and workers from Southeast Asia, as well as including Indonesia. And so that definitely has to change. And very fortunately, President Lee Jae-myung made a promise that he will do whatever he can to enhance the protection of the migrant workers from Southeast Asia, including the Indonesian workers. So let's keep our finger crossed. And if I add one more, I wish the South Korean government sort of give a permanent residency to the foreign workers, if it's possible, to bring their family, and so that workers can settle in South Korea, and they can make economic contribution for South Korea.
Right, which of course is also an opinion that quite a number of pundits have also shared, Dr. Lee. Steven, while South Korea attempts to address a shrinking workforce, Indonesia appears to be faced with a sinking capital city, Jakarta. Could you tell us a bit more about this reality, the concerns surrounding it, of course, and the countermeasures against it?
Well, let me be clear that you mean a literally sinking capital and not a...
Not a metaphor.
Yeah, Jakarta is not seeking in any metaphorical way. I think it recently, over the past year, I think became the most populous city in the world. And I've not spent a ton of time there, but I've been there a few times, and I found it to be a place of great energy and great vitality, and just a kind of stirring and inspiring place, even though it has a lot of problems with traffic and with a number of other logistical things. So specifically what this means is there are so many people living on this particular, I think Java, the island that Jakarta is on, is the most populous island in the world. And over the decades, as the city's population has increased and the demands on the infrastructure has increased, so much groundwater has been withdrawn from the land under the city that has just created vacuums in places just created a bunch of empty space, and that's causing the land to gradually dip. And so this is in a part of the world that's prone to tropical storms, and Jakarta has a ton of problems with flooding, partly because a significant portion of the city, I believe it's 40%, is under sea level. So this being the tropics, this being Southeast Asia, every year there's this rainy season where you get these kind of out of nowhere downpours that can lead to big parts of the city being submerged with water for indefinite periods of time, and then the government having to find ways to go in and pump all this water out. This is happening in a city where I think much less now than in the past, but a fair portion of the population still lives in kind of informal housing, sort of in places that they've built out of kind of makeshift materials and are not like not sturdy concrete buildings with indoor plumbing and all the rest. So there's a real sense of urgency that the Jakarta needs to buttress the parts of it that are on the water and create like bigger seawalls. And engineers, I'm sure, are working on other alternative measures. I know that the previous president, Joko Widodo, was a big proponent of this idea of moving the capital to another part of the country. I'm not sure how well that's going. I know that there's been some issues with attracting the requisite amount of investment and convincing people to live there and convincing companies to set up shop there. But definitely a big challenge. If I could just share one anecdote of my last time in Jakarta. I had to go do an interview at a hotel that was separate from the hotel where the event. I was there for the ASEAN Forum, and I said to my Indonesian colleague, nobody in Indonesia walks anywhere because they consider the streets to be kind of too chaotic. And I said, how long do you think it'll take me to get there? And she said, well, by car about an hour, but if you walked, it might take about a half an hour. So the traffic is so bad that it would literally, her estimation was that it would take double the time for me to travel there in a car than if I just walked. But as a native Indonesian herself, she didn't consider walking to be a viable option for a foreigner like me. She said that I would find the streets kind of too difficult to navigate. But that being said, Jakarta is a fun place to visit that I would recommend to anybody who's interested.
I wondered, did you take the car? Did you walk?
In that case, I ended up taking a car because there ended up being a group of us. We all had to go together. So.
I see. Good to know, good to know. Dr. Lee, beyond trade and defense with regard to diplomacy, how might South Korea's partnership with Indonesia promote peace on the Korean peninsula? I mean, what's the status that is of Indonesia's ties with North Korea?
Let me answer your question in two parts. First, the Indonesia and North Korea ties. This is very interesting. I would say the bilateral relation between North Korea and Indonesia is not much about practical cooperation. There's not much economic cooperation or military cooperation or strategic cooperation between North Korea and Indonesia. But the tie is quite symbolic and historical, if you know what I mean. And the first Indonesian president, Sukarno, had a good relation with the former North Korean leader Kim Il-sung, and the Sukarno's daughter, who were one of the former president of Indonesia, succeeded the kind of a partnership with North Korea. And recently, the foreign minister, Indonesian foreign minister, visited. Was invited to the 80th anniversary of the Workers' Party of North Korea ceremony. So the tie continues, but it's quite symbolic, and there's not much about practical cooperation. I'm not a North Korea expert, but at the moment, North Korea cut the communication with South Korea and has no sort of intention to resume the talk with South Korea anytime soon. So in this sort of tense situation, I don't think Indonesia has much kind of a role to do in the Korean Peninsula issue. But otherwise, for example, if North Korea is open to dialogue with South Korea, even North Korea has got the intention to open up, then Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, can bridge between the two parties, North Korea and South Korea, And also, as you can see, the former previous example like Singapore and Hanoi, Southeast Asian countries, including Jakarta, can provide some kind of a neutral venue for talk between North Korea and South Korea. And eventually, if North Korea opens up, then Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia, can invest in very labor-intensive industry. And the Southeast Asian countries, like Indonesia, can be an advisor for the transition from the controlled, centralized economy to market economy. And there's lots of role Indonesia can do once North Korea changes mind.
Right, indeed. Once North Korea decides to engage with the broader international community then. All right, Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Right, and Stephen here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.